I thought, OMG, this explains so much, but you're sort of in that shock mode. So I don't remember hearing anything else she said during that session. And I remember him going, I don't know, maybe. The car ride home that night was obviously awkward. And in my head, it all makes sense.
This is season 3 of the Your Neurodiverse Relationship podcast, which is for adults in all kinds of neurodiverse relationships, not just romantic partnerships. I'm your host, Jodi Carlton, and I've spent close to 2 decades growing in my understanding of how our different brains influence the way we understand and relate to each other. Through the years, I've helped several thousand people understand themselves and their loved ones. This podcast is a place where I come together with others to talk about their journeys. I've got a great lineup of guests talking about things like masking, traits of neurodivergent folks, traits of neurotypical folks, what kind of things cause difficulties in our neurodiverse relationships, but also some of the wonderful things about our neurodiverse relationships. Also, this season is a video cast where you can enjoy watching on YouTube, or you can listen to us on the podcast like you have before. If you're really enjoying this podcast and if you've gotten something out of it, please leave us a review, because reviews really matter. And we want to get this out there to as many people as possible so they can benefit from it just like you. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe so you'll get notifications of upcoming podcasts and other videos that I post there as well. Welcome. What will we talk about today? Today, I have a colleague, Laura Schreiner, who is a couples therapist, and she works with neurodiverse couples and has her own experiences with neurodiverse family and relationships. So I was really excited when she reached out to want to have a chat. Laura, tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and your family, and we'll talk shop.
Sure. I have been doing therapy for over 15 years in general. I didn't really know about the neurodiverse lens until I realized it was personal for me in 2017. It actually started with my father's passing, and it was the accumulation of being married to my husband and knowing that there were some odd, eccentric quirks about him. But when my father had passed, I finally said, this is it. We're not communicating all the way. And I really need you right now. I'm grieving here. It's a big deal. The kids were young. I have a son who was at that time in second grade, and my daughter was in preschool. So they were young. I was doing the majority of the load of caregiving and parenting. And I insisted we go to couples therapy. And probably the first or second session is when the therapist just turned to him and bluntly said, "Are you on the spectrum or something?" I stopped at that moment. I would think I was emoting, crying, something about my father and being upset and things. She said, "'Cause you're smiling and your wife is crying right now." I'm not sure I loved her tone. It was just the aha moment. And I paused. I think I saw white light, and I'm not even exaggerating. I'm a person that doesn't run out of words or ideas usually. There's always connections going on. So it was almost a shock to your system. And I thought, OMG, this explains so much, but you're sort of in that shock mode. So I don't remember hearing anything else she said during that session. And I remember him going, I don't know, maybe. The car ride home that night was obviously awkward. And in my head, it all makes sense. You're having your entire life flash before you. I think we were together 15 years at that point, and big moments in your life, having the kids, illnesses, times where you needed emotional reciprocity like nobody's business, and it wasn't there. It was all a big flashback. And I was grieving too, add that to the brain fog. And I eventually got him within a few weeks to take like an online quiz and that kind of thing. And the therapist was wise enough to say, this isn't my expertise if this is the case. But she had a friend whose husband was on the spectrum. And in hindsight, she had said, well, I just don't think you guys are going to work out. And I was like, don't tell me. whether I'm going to work things out with my spouse or not. So in a way, it was like, oh, really? And I thought to myself, well, in hindsight, we're going to be the couple that makes it. Game on. Here we go. What do I do first? So, of course, I started looking for resources and use online and stuff, cobwebs and tumbleweed.
Yeah.
There's
Mhm.
not much out there. Then I start finding the blogs of the negative vomiting of horrible bashing. And I get it. Sometimes that's the only platform somebody has, but it wasn't very hopeful and it wasn't very encouraging that this was going to be something that you can get your head around, first of all. And second, what do you do about it if that's the case? So now what? So he's on the spectrum. Now what? What does that mean even? And it also was making 100 other connections because it was equating some other immediate family to there are some
Right.
similarities going on here. That snowballs. That led me down the research path. So of course I start reading every book and going through every workbook. I found tons of stuff from the UK. Thank you. You can't
Mhm.
so much here. Every
Mhm.
workbook, every book. He did read a book. He said, I'll read this one. I said, deal. Then I thought, well, I'm going to have to do this myself. And as a therapist, I'm like, well, shoot. So that's what started my journey into neurodiversity. I found the AANE, the
Mhm.
Asperger Autism
Mhm.
Network on the East Coast, Grace Mayo.
Grace's program. Yeah.
I said, I think I'm going to sign up for this. It was sort of on the back burner anyway, because I had family members. And I was like, yeah, I should probably put this under my tool belt. But it was one of these file for later, and I get to it. It
Mhm.
became really real, really quick. I think we had therapy for about 2 months and then called it quits for other various reasons. He was willing to show up, and I was thinking, "What are you getting out of this? Or is it just me that needs to really come and have testimony for 15 years worth of stuff that came up?" Meanwhile, juggle the kids, juggle where am I with my father. I was really close to my dad. He is undiagnosed, and I absolutely think he was on the spectrum. He was an engineer. He had his own quirks, just little things. The music he listened to was unconventional. He wasn't a super social guy, but he could be very charming and sweet, almost like putting on a mask
Mhm.
when he had to. His tempers were here and there. I always knew he loved us, but he wasn't a big talker. He wasn't
Mhm.
super emotional, but he was there for us. He did show up, and I do have so many fond memories. In any case, I'm rambling now, but we had an understanding, my dad and I had a way of communicating. And ironically, now that I look back, I wrote him a lot of notes back in the day. We communicated with little notes. I was doing the work before I knew I was doing the work. I have two older siblings, and I was the youngest. And even with my own mom, he'd listen to her, but he'd really listen to me. If there's something that came to push or shove or something that was a big thing, it was like everyone looked at me like, deal with dad. And so
Yeah.
I did. Even when it came toward the end, I was the dutiful daughter that got him onto hospice. That was also my background too, was geriatrics. And so it just made logical sense. With that, though, I feel like I've always had an understanding for neurodiversity. Again, without knowing it, there was a kid in first grade playing on the playground, and this kid was in the corner all the time doing his beep bop boop robot thing. And I'd always try to engage with him, and he wouldn't have any of me. He's like, no, thank you, very politely. And I was like, what's going on here? I remember all the kids didn't care. They were all playing, everybody else was doing
Yeah.
stuff. I had my best friend that I played with, but I was just constantly watching and curious. He's so smart. He's so quiet. I digress. So all of that with my dad sort of being attracted to neurodiverse
It makes
boyfriends,
sense. So boyfriends too, you see the pattern?
not all of them, of course, but
Mhm.
couple that it was like the marriage material. I wanted that groundedness. I used the
Mhm.
word
Mhm.
groundedness. Obviously intelligent. I had to have someone I could be at a same
Yeah.
level speaking to. That was really big. Somebody whose lifestyle just met my same values, same sort of loyalty
Mhm.
and love of family and education and things like that. There was definitely a pattern there.
We're both therapists. It's this cliche that we grow up to marry our fathers, but it's really not a cliche. And we learn that first relationship with a man is with our dads. And that's the foundation. That's the baseline relationship that we have. It's how we learn who we are and how we relate to others. And it's interesting the patterns that I see where you're describing your dad as that engineer and you just describe that relationship with him. And now you recognize that you're in a marriage with someone who's neurodiverse. I see that pattern. I also see another pattern that you didn't describe just now, but I see another pattern where people come out of childhood relationships where there's emotional neglect of some sort, and there's some kind of personality disorder in parents or abuse, and grounding is still that word. They look for someone who's grounded. I think it's interesting that we see our neurodiverse partners as grounded, even though there can be an emotional meltdown when they hit a break point. But overall, there's a much narrower range of emotion for the men anyway. The
Yes.
women, that's a totally different story.
Yes.
But the males, the guys, that seems grounded.
It's stable and it's emotionally one step back. They can remain calm and collected. I don't necessarily think I heard everything's going to be okay, which I would have liked to hear. He'd sit quietly, just being in presence with you.
Mhm.
I read that as strength and stability and protection.
You do misread that as I'm emotionally regulated. I think
Mhm.
that's where we misconstrue it. And I say we because I know for me, that's what it was. And I see it in all my clients. We misinterpret that as emotionally regulated when really you were just mentioning you were looking forward to hearing my podcast with my best friend Kathy, which by the time this podcast airs, it's already out. She talks about how she can't process her emotions. She knows she has them. She's very emotional, but she can't process them very well. So there's emotion there sometimes, but it's not regulated. Sometimes it's not coming out. It's not visible. It's inside and it's happening, but it's not regulated. So what we're seeing is that affect is sometimes flatter, but what's behind the affect is this cloud of emotion that's not processing. And our neurodiverse partners or best friends or children, they've got all this emotion in there and they don't even know how to label it or identify it, what to do with it.
I agree with you. Fast forward 5 years into us being aware and I would say accepting. My husband accepts that he's undiagnosed officially, but has enough traits and the semantics we use in the house is we're just a neurodiverse family that has been accepted. And it's been the biggest blessing.
Mhm.
Okay. In terms of change, it is slow glacial change, but it is change nonetheless. And that was being accepted. I know he went through stages of relief. I know he was upset at some point. What is this label and what does this really mean? I think he
Mhm.
internalized it to being his fault or the whole
Yeah.
blaming thing. When you were just talking about regulating underneath it all or being dysregulated underneath it all, I now know after 5 years, I don't claim to be predictably correct every time, but I can now sense a little bit of processing time has to happen. Or he's dysregulated. He's got that
Mhm.
pullback going on, and I need to stop. Usually it's just too much in your face, too many words, too many ideas, much of me spouting to just say, let him catch up with himself. He's getting better at articulating that, which again has been our own languaging throughout the 5 years. A lot of short talks with each other. And sometimes
Mhm.
when I say short, I'm talking about less than like 20 minutes in the car. Or some nights we have together, we get into talkie talk, I call it, it could be an hour or a little more, but he's fried after that. I could tell he's
Yeah.
done. We're both like, let's go to bed now.
Those time limits are so important. In my communication program, that's one of the things that I stress so much is time limits because
Yeah.
those of us who are neurotypical, some of us tend to be hyperverbal too. We can just talk and talk and talk. I am this, and I know a lot of my clients have been verbal processors. We process by talking. And so we can just go on and on and on and on. It's how we process. It can just for hours. And it's the way we literally process it. And like you said, they get fried. My daughter is one of the ones that can go on and on and on and on when she's the one processing. I'm starting to glaze over, but it's only when she's processing. If we're having a two-way dialogue and I'm part of that, she really hits her limit. As a matter of fact, she's 19 and autistic. We had a conversation a couple weeks ago, and it was a difficult decision that we were making together and a disappointing situation for her. And so I was talking about it to her and just going through the bullet point list of this decision that we were making. And I saw her start to shut down and she was getting overwhelmed and started to tear up. And then she just started literally going, Stop, stop. I can't hear
Oh,
you. So I did. And I'm like, okay, we'll table this. And then a couple of days later, she told me that in that moment, she literally had a visual of vines wrapping around her face and her neck. My words were coming at her and they were like vines choking her. And I was like, "Whoa, that is so powerful." That's what it felt like to her. It gives me goosebumps to think about it
yeah.
now. And I was like, "Oh, I really wanted to just remember that so that when I see her or just need to respect." I teach the pause button, tell people, "Press
Mhm.
pause when you feel that happening." We really have to be respectful of that.
10 seconds at least, and that can feel like an eternity. And that's not a long time. My son does the same. His eyes will tear up. And it's the deer in the headlights sort of look, and
Mhm,
it's the eyes tearing up. Actually, it happened this morning. I had accused him of doing something he didn't do, and I retracted it right away when I realized I was wrong. He said, I am so sorry. That wasn't on you. But already the visceral
mhm,
reaction. And I thought, wow,
mhm,
you notice more when you know more, really tune in. With that, not every little thing is neurodiverse in that category. I find a lot of my clients blame everything on autism, blame everything on ADHD, blame everything on whatever buzzword they've got for the week. And it's like, hold on, there's personality here.
we're human beings too,
Oh,
We
neurodiverse or not, you do that too.
It's just one layer. It's one layer, one aspect of who we are. And we're human beings too. One thing that's influencing how we show up in a conversation or an interaction, sometimes it's the neurodiversity, but sometimes it's just our personality, or sometimes it's how we're feeling that day. It's how much sleep we got last night.
So many
Yeah.
couples come to me for the first time. It typically is the spouse that's not on the spectrum and they're begging for some help. I can't unsee. And I feel like, oh man, what did I do in the last 15 years when I saw anxiety? They're so high anxiety, they can't even talk. Then
Mhm,
I equally see depressive symptoms. At the same time, it could look like bipolar. It could look like there's a lot of ADHD diagnosis for spouses. And it's
mhm.
this hyper kind of, you hear me finally. And it's this giant dump after
Yes.
that, you're just like, "Okay." So when they come like that, usually I have to see if their spouse is in the same orbit as them before I even know what I'm working with. That's the simultaneous working from, I think, your backpack analogy. We're going to see what's happening in the couple, but there's so much work to do with each individual same
So
time.
absolutely. I'm glad you said that because you're right. It's that neurotypical partner who's made the discovery. You guys had a therapist bring it up to you both. That's fairly unusual in the couples that come to me. Usually it's a neurotypical partner who's figured it out in some way and they've done the research already. You don't know how much the other spouse is aware.
Right.
So I've seen a lot of neurotypical partners really wanting who they believe to be neurodiverse partner to be brought up to speed. They're bringing them in. They're wanting me to educate the partner, fix them and teach them what they need to know. And what they find is when they start working with me, the neurotypical partner has a lot of work to do too. And I've had so many of them go, I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't expecting me to have to do the work. And a lot of them are like, why should I have to do the work? I'm like, well, there's two of you here in this relationship. There's two of you. There's a reason why you picked your spouse. There's a reason why I picked my spouse. All of that is part of what's in our backpack. And I've had to do my own work and figure out what contributed to me being in that relationship and contributing to some of the dynamics that were there, the communication and all of it
It's an
mattered. We can't
overwhelm.
there's a lot for both partners.
I feel like it goes in stages with the NT or the spouse that's not on the spectrum. They're excited about all the information. They're eating it up. I did it too,
Yeah.
feeding all this information. I'm going to have this. I'm going to solve this $1 million equation. There's so many parts and pieces to this. And one more thing that you're asking them to do, you've got to work on yourself and heal a little bit of this past too, because honey, you're angry. There's some resentment going on. And that's the other angle that you get. I remember 10 years prior being in a women's group, we would meet monthly. I'd go and I'd tell these ladies, I'm feeling pretty good. Usually I'm a pretty positive person, but I've got this undercurrent of anger and I don't know why. And I don't know, it's sort of with my spouse, but I don't really know why I love him. And it was like an oscillation of sad, validate me, forever. And to hear that it's not something I'm doing wrong, that I'm enough, that all these validations that I would sign up for when we got married. And now, again, in hindsight, clients come and there is all this. I have a lot of work. Yeah, you got a lot of relational trauma to do,
Hmm.
1,000 cuts thing going on. Meanwhile, your spouse is still showing up. And I make a big point of that in couple sessions. He's showing up and he's present because it's not
Yeah.
enough to just show up. It's showing up and being present. And again, that 60 minutes is a long time. So I frequently check in with the person on the spectrum. How are we doing right now? Are you
Mm.
feeling overwhelmed? Retention, because I always get afterwards, it's great during therapy. And then after we're done seeing you, he falls back to his old ways or he doesn't
Yeah.
stick. The retention, we have to work on buy in and motivation and logic.
That's what I call motivation and willingness. You're calling it buy-in. I've got the three pillars that I say for a relationship to work is ability,
Uh huh.
capacity. I've coached people into recognizing that there's just not the capacity there because sometimes it's not.
It's really hard for spouses to accept
Yes.
because they say, how can they do it with other people and they can't do it with me?
Yes. And sometimes it's not that they're doing it with other people, they're masking temporarily. There's a difference between having a temporary work relationship or friendship where you're with somebody for a short period of time and doing life with
Right.
somebody.
They
Yeah.
misunderstand and misinterpret that their spouse all along has been capable of doing that.
Yeah, I'm actually working with a couple right now. I've actually seen this several times with military couples who then go into retirement. The military staff and personnel, they're taught to do things like participate in social events where the family and the wives are involved, or they're told they go through the military what and when and how, make sure your wills are set up and taken care of. That sounds morbid. It's a structure thing that they do because they're moved around a lot. They make sure that the families are set up with social networks and other parents and schools. And so then when those folks retire and they leave the military setting, there's no
Lost.
structure. A lot of times they go into trying to get into the civilian workforce and they may get a job, but then the home life that they had been managing, those skills don't generalize then to afterwards. And that's when, wait a minute, where's the person that I've been married to all these years? What happened to that? So I see that happening. So without that structure or without that setting, it's really different. People struggle to see that capacity isn't there. And when people come to me, sometimes I tell people, I'm not here to not save your marriage, but this
Right.
is for you to get clarity about where to go from here. Sometimes that capacity for a relationship is not there. And if you keep trying to make something work that's not going to work, it's still not going to work no matter how much you try. Now, that's not to say neurodiverse relationships can't make it. Now, you were saying that the therapist said to you, you're not going to work,
Yes.
but some can. Motivation and willingness there. Willingness is one thing, but buy in and
The
actual
action.
action, that's got to be there too.
And that's behavior driven. I wanted to back up to my WHAM group. What about me? Focuses on taking inventory. Once they've learned everything they think they need to know, they're looking at their spouse differently.
Mhm.
With the change, it's the whole should I stay or should I go? And the answer is you are
Mm.
the deciding person on this, and obviously your spouse at some level, although usually the spouse is not super up and willing to leave because it's scary and it's hard, just too much executive functioning things. So that spouse who's been through all of that change takes the inventory. Is like, I'm not doing this. It's been 30 years. It's been 40 years. But even grounded into that, we have the abuse trauma piece I
Mhm.
wanted to bring up. How much of that is brought to the therapeutic table week after week, where a couple can barely be in the same room as each other because of high reactivity
Mhm.
and because of fight or flight and all this physiology that's going on. So there's a lot of education continually done with reminding the spouse and T of what their capacity is, but also we need to notice what's physiologically going on, not only with your spouse that he's in freeze right now, he's in a freeze mode or something, but their reactivity and how they can go into their own fight flight. It's
Yes.
like this big can of worms that you have to gently
Mhm.
open up for each party, individually and as a couple, and tease that apart so you can teach them. Because again, it's like fine during our session, and sometimes they can argue during session, which I sometimes like to see how it's progressing. I won't
Help.
even say arguing, it's more like how's the communication going. But when they try it on their own, it reverts to the old pattern really quickly. Or sometimes to get somebody out of freeze or to get somebody, there's a lot of polyvagal things you can do. There's a lot of breath work you can do. There's some mindfulness, not as much with folks on the spectrum as there is with the NT. Even with those on the spectrum, that interoception is missing, that I don't even know how I feel, but I know it's not good.
Right. And they are aware there's something not right. It's harder to do body work. I was trained in accelerated resolution therapy, which is an offshoot of EMDR.
Oh, I was
And
RRT, a rapid resolution therapy,
it's similar.
similar vein.
Yeah. And I found that it's a little harder to do with folks who are neurodiverse, that they struggle to have that interoceptive sense because of exactly what you're saying. There's not that connection to the body. So it's a little bit harder. But going along with what you're saying, I literally just was having this conversation with a client today. The way I do coaching is a little bit different. When I'm doing intensive coaching with clients, I meet with them on call, but I also have messaging interactions with them in between calls. And so I'm able to try to stay involved and intervene more in the moment in those in betweens. And I was emphasizing to him what you were talking about. They go back into their habits. And I was just saying, somebody, one of you has to break the cycle because they go right back into the same cycle of how they interact. And it's the same thing. And they end up rehashing stuff. I said, somebody, whether it's you, whether it's your partner, somebody's got to take action, even if it's a baby step,
Right.
because if you don't, that cycle will never stop. Well, it will. It will eventually stop. The relationship may crash. You can't survive, especially the highly antagonistic relationships. Calls
Yes.
them the ones with the boxing gloves. When they come in, I was like, you guys are in the boxing ring. You're
Nasties. I call it the nasties.
some part of that cycle's got to be broken, and it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be different. The cycle feels normal because it's what they're doing over and over again. It's normal, but it doesn't feel good.
No, it's dysfunctional, and one of us needs to throw up a white flag right now, do
Mhm.
something different, look at something different in the room, engage your senses. I teach them, look at your five senses. What do you smell right now? What do you see right now? For pressure, even
Yeah.
though that doesn't work when they're in the heat of the moment.
Not with each other.
The irony is they say they feel the same things. I'm walking on eggshells when I'm in their company. When we're in
They
the
go
room
through.
together, all of a sudden eggshells, and it's like, what? But you guys clearly were able to, by example and skills, do this here. What's different? And it's like you said, going back into that pattern, being aware of it, and then somebody has to do something different
Mhm.
consistently. And then the data has to be registered with whoever's got the longer processing time to
Mhm.
absorb and realize that this doesn't have to be this way and to keep at it. I think that's another one of the biggest issues that comes up is the rote rehearsal and skills enough. I've tried it, doesn't work. He's a
Twice.
master, at this point. I've been doing this 5 years and we're nowhere close to that. But there's still a lot of faux pas. It's not Pollyanna unicorns every day. Believe me.
You got here after years reinforcing
Mhm.
the pattern. So it's going to take time to create new patterns and you're going to backslide. You're extinguishing a behavior. I'm going back to behavioral stuff. when you're extinguishing a behavior, sometimes we regret change
Mhm.
regression or something to a previous behavior. That's going to happen. And tell folks that's normal. They'll come to me and they're like, "Oh, we were doing so well." All of a sudden, I'm like, "Okay, it's all right. It was one time. It doesn't mean that everything's undone, that you're back to square one." They're so relieved. They're like, "Oh, reboot."
There's a lot of validation that has to be done. We say you're doing the work by A, showing up, and B is trying. I have to reframe what trying looks like because for ENT, the way that their ideal is, and not to burst the bubble, but we go back to capacity and everything else. That's just not in their wheelhouse. That's just not how they're designed. And here's the example. My spouse is not a prolific poet, a writer in birthday cards, holiday cards, or anything like that. I know that it takes him half an hour to an hour to write a little paragraph or a little couple sentences in a birthday
Mhm,
card expressing how much love
mhm,
he has for me and how thankful he is for things I do. And there's grammatical errors. I have found that so endearing over the years. At first, I was like,
mhm.
okay, crossing out on the card. Come on. I wouldn't want him to copy things off the internet or parrot other things thinking that's what the spouse wants. No, this means I know you put so much effort into this card. We're good. This is it. This is what I do expect, actually. And this is not just good enough. This is who you are. And I love and accept that.
I think that's so important. I'm glad you brought that up because it's the definition of trying. We have to remember that what one person's effort is and trying may be so different for them than it is for us. And it's really important to take pause and it may be effortless for me to sit down and write a letter of how much I love
Sweet.
you, but just truly mind boggling for somebody else to write something like that, to just even make the effort to go to the store, to pick out a card, read all the cards, the energy and effort involved in that, the fact that it's even done is huge. We have to really look at our expectations. Where do our own expectations come from? And why do we even define it the way we do?
I think it's hard to even define it because once I start to break down with ENT, what do you think you want? It's more tumbleweed because they have an
Yeah.
idea. Okay, today, if a magic wand were to floof over you, what would that look like? And it's blank stares on both ends because
Yeah.
change itself can really throw the relationship
If you
over time.
actually got what you're asking for, what would that look like? What would that feel like? Because sometimes it's a concept. It's a
Mhm.
concept that someone wants. It's an idea. It's a concept. When we stop and think about it actually happening, then it starts to be like, oh, I'm not really sure.
Or a fantasy.
Right. Yeah. Concept fantasy. Yes, exactly. And that's where a lot of times when I ask people, where does that come from? I do the 5 levels of why a lot of times. Why is that? And then ask them again, why is that? And why is that? You
Mhm.
get 2 or 3 levels in and they're just kind of like,
I don't know.
I
Some construct from childhood.
or somewhere or a movie or
Yeah.
books. Are there other alternatives? I've got this rating scale too. I'm like, how important is that? How much is it impacting your life? I can't decide for you. So that's the work though. That's the work that has to be done. And it applies to all relationships, not just neurodiverse
Yeah,
relationships.
I would do the same thing in regular couples counseling or normally work with individuals. And so couples was a whole nother multiple lessons. And I sometimes see clients alone, one on one, and I wind up sometimes even seeing family members, children, and that sort of thing. We haven't even brought up with all the stuff going on in the marriage, the stress and the pressure of parenting and caregiving or being in a sandwich generation and
Mhm,
caring for an elderly
mhm,
parent. I wanted to say this today, but my spouse told me I could possibly be his special interest again when the kids move out to college or get out of the house, that I be put on his priority list. It could be seen as insulting. And I know that what that transcribes or translates to is I can't wait to be with you again
mhm.
on a more one to one intimate level. Or at least I'd like to hope that, right? So I
Yeah.
have to clarify that and I say, do you mean that you can't wait to be with me alone so we can do more stuff together and spend more time? And he says, yes. And I say, is that because between work and parenting, that he frames as taking up all of his energy or brain power, or there's not much left at the end of the day. Which I can agree to at one point, being a parent and person who works too. Get it.
Being a provider and getting the kids raised, getting the kids raised is a huge undertaking. It's a huge task as a neurotypical mom. I also know that you do a lot of the raising, not to minimize what he does, but I can see where also part of the priority for the two of you as a couple is getting that done. I know that for a lot of my neurodiverse guys, the jobs they're doing, the work that they're doing is to provide that ability for the family to get the kids raised. I think it'll really be interesting because there's going to be
A
some,
metamorphosis you'll see hopefully change over time. We weren't the couple we were, obviously, when we were first married, nor do I want that ever again. That honeymoon thing ain't happening anymore. Thank goodness. Too much work.
yeah, but you
But
can see the difference in what that means to you now versus what it would have meant to you. And then if you were to go to a therapist who doesn't know anything about, they're going to see this confusion and hoping that more therapists will start to learn more about this and be able to recognize and understand.
therapists,
Yeah.
folks who test, psychiatrists I've run into, and I
Mhm.
love everyone in our field, don't get me wrong. I think we all do valuable work and we all have stuff to contribute, but the stereotypes are still too much of a dichotomy. They're still
Yeah,
too categorized. And it's like, well, if he doesn't stim, then he must not be on the spectrum.
I agree with you. I support my profession, but the education's just not there. I've had people come to me who have been told they couldn't be on the spectrum if they have a college degree.
We didn't have much in grad school, so much to cover as it is. And there's only so much you can do in so little time. I'm happy to see slow movement. I wish there was more for females. I mean, I also feel like even as a clinician, I have a frame and I have some experience with couples, heterosexual couples, female, male. There's gender things, there's cultural things, there's everything else that is reality that's happening. I wish there was more, even in the individuals I counsel that are neurodiverse with more than just on the spectrum. There's comorbidities going on. There's OCD,
Yeah.
there's ADHD melding in with that. I don't think until I learned from the AANE and moving forward, you can't unsee what you see now.
Right.
However, I can see being as a therapist being very judgy toward the NT, thinking it sounds very naggy,
Mhm.
sound very needy and victimy. And the guy is just sitting there like a prince. Hello, I am here. And I will tell you
It's
what you need
oh,
here.
that is so how a neurodiverse couple presents so often. I know that was my experience when I was married. We went to multiple therapists over the course of our marriage, and I know I seemed like such an emotional mess. And my ex-husband just seemed so solid and grounded. Like you're saying, grounded. I've never dealt with clinical depression in my life, but I remember walking out of one therapy session with a new guy, and he had told me I was depressed and needed to go on an antidepressant. And I remember just looking at him like, what? And my ex-husband, he was just like, I don't know what he's talking about. You're not depressed. And I'm like, I know. It was so weird. We didn't go back to him. I don't know what he saw that day that he thought I was depressed. That's how it looks. A lot of our typical women, especially, are misdiagnosed with bipolar when it's really just a range of emotions.
Screaming for attention. It's like, hello, I've been here for X number of years and see me, hear me, validate
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
all
and
of
it does look victimy in the beginning, and even when I'm working with couples, it takes a little time sometimes to weed out, because I've also run across couples where, like we were saying before, there's a lot of layers to everything. I've worked with couples where I did run into a neurotypical partner who had a personality who's married to a neurodiverse husband who's actually being abused. They're interesting to have to tweak out all of that as a coach. There's just a lot of combinations to everything.
the irony is, can anyone be more opposite sometimes? Then we try to find that shared interest or that shared road in between. I assume both parties are in the same space because my husband and I are both astronomy, sci-fi
Mm,
nerds. So in my mind, when I see someone, it's like, okay, in the same universe. If they're not, the guy's already going to divorce her. Something's going on before they even see me. Then are we in the same galaxy? Then are we in the same solar system? If I use all of us as planets, if I use the planet analogy of all our own planets, first of all, are we in the same orbit? And that to me is educating about neurodiversity. So once I can
Mhm.
get them that point, which takes time sometimes, then I can get them to visit each other's planets. We're going to go visit each other's planets for the day, and it's by invitation only. And that's the
Mm,
communication. It's by invitation only because you cannot let the other in without that vulnerability, humbleness,
right.
right? After that's been established, and that can take a long time because we go back and forth and the bridge is pulled from both planets to go across, right? After a long time, you see them both, and this is self invitation to the other person's planet, particularly for the spouse on the spectrum to peek over and say, hello, anybody? When they can get there, or even little snippets of here and there, and I can say, ooh, you were unannounced, but you were at each other's planets. That's a day to say cheers and celebrate each other.
That's really good. Do you have that visually represented in your office?
I only do telehealth, and I know the more I use the visual, whether it's pictorially or I write down things, it's easier for
Mhm.
client, particularly to just take it off their screens and they have the notes or they have the homework
Mhm.
kind of thing. So yeah, I have done that in the past. It resonates with a lot of folks.
I'm an analogy queen. I use analogies all the time, and I try to use the whiteboard on Zoom sometimes, and I'm a terrible artist. I That's a good one, though. I really like that one, and I might steal I'll
Thanks.
give you cred. That's super good. Was there anything else
Yeah.
that you feel like you wanna share with the listeners today? This has been a great conversation.
Just want to impart on everyone that the other giant part of what I do is to discuss until the cows come home and then some self care. When the CNT starts learning that it's okay to power back that they've given away, and a sense of micromanaging and prompting and things like that, to take a step
Yeah.
back. Self care, whether it's something small every day or they plan actual physical breaks away from each, get a little air, so to speak. There have been aha moments through both of them taking some self-care time. For the folks on the spectrum, it's not necessarily their hobby or special interest, but even finding time to practice being in the present moment for them
That is very useful, and I'd say especially, like you said, for the neurotypical spouse. The neurodiverse partner oftentimes is
already.
doing a lot of
Doing
that, and the neurotypical partner is fearful of taking that step back. Detachment is difficult, or detachment's probably not the right word. The distance is harder for them. They're just constantly trying to engage
the
and
hamsters are going
connect.
24/7.
And then also they're just like you said, there's so much on their plate that they're doing to be able to step back from their partner, their spouse, and from the responsibilities even. That's just so important. We don't even realize that life will go on without us for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or for a couple of days. My first cousin lives down in Naples, Florida. I'm here in Georgia. She's my age, and I went down to stay with her and visit her for a long weekend, like 4 days last week. It's hard for me as a business owner and raising my kids, and my mother lives here with us, and I'm in that sandwich generation you're talking about, and it's hard for me to step away. I did it, and it felt like a knotted up muscle slowly starting to relax,
It takes a
and
while sometimes.
I know. I came back feeling like, "Okay, I've got resources now mentally."
You're
Yeah,
rebooted. There's a
really
freedom in that.
important.
There's a freedom to let that space go in your head when you're just constantly trying to predict the next move that he or she's going to make. We can go
Yeah.
on to take that and say, well, it is what it is. I'm out of here. And really
Mhm.
practice being out of there. Then my clients who come back who actually had a day or two look better, they sound, but
Mm.
I have to point out, excuse me. But did you notice
It's
that
so
you've got a smile on your face? And it's been a while since you've been able to joke around a little bit. Personally, trying to practice what I preach. And so being able to step away and take a walk or even walk the dog, being able to verbalize to my neurodiverse family, mom is taking a break unless the house
Mhm.
is on fire. Do not come in here. And that's how it has to be. And I'll still
Yes.
sometimes get interrupted. And I'm like, it's not
Yes.
happening. So, first thing to go in these situations is self care. You have to have that to keep the Titanic up.
Yes. We don't want the ship to sink. Thanks so much for reaching out and being on the podcast. It was great talking to you, and maybe I'll
My
have you back
pleasure.
again sometime.
Love that. Sounds good.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again for sure. Thank you so much to all of my guests of season 3 of the Your Neurodiverse Relationship podcast. These folks are bringing their lives to you to help all of you out there who are trying to figure out your own relationships. If you'd ever be interested in being on a podcast, just email us at gethelp@jodicarlton.com. Also, be sure to visit me online at jodicarlton.com to see all the resources that I have available to you. Until next time.